Gamma ray, high energy electromagnetic radiation, a highly penetrating type of nuclear radiation similar to X-ray radiation except that it comes from within the nucleus of an atom and has a higher energy. Energy-wise, very similar to cosmic ray except that cosmic rays originate from outer space. Galvanizing, placing a thin layer of zinc on a ferrous material to protect the underlying surface from corrosion. Gangue, sand, rock and other impurities surrounding the mineral of interest in an ore. Gauge counter, a gas-filled tube which discharges electrically when ionizing radiation passes through it. Gel, colloidal suspension of a solid dispersed in a liquid, a semi-rigid solid. Gem dimethyl group, two methyl groups of the same carbon atom. Geometrical isomers, compounds with different arrangements of groups on either side of a bond with restricted rotation, such as a double bond or a single bond in a ring. For example, cis-trans isomers of certain alkenes. Stereoisomers that are not mirror images of each other, also known as position isomers. Graham's law. The rates of effusion of gases are inversely proportional to the square roots of their molecular weights or densities. Greenhouse effect. Trapping of heat at the surface of the earth by carbon dioxide and water vapor in atmosphere. Ground state. The lowest energy state or most stable state of an atom, molecule or ion. Group. A vertical column in the periodic table, also called a family. Haber process. A process for the catalyzed industrial production of ammonia from N2 and H2 at high temperature and pressure. Half cell. Compartment in which the oxidation or reduction half reaction occurs in a voltaic cell. Half-life. The time required for half of a reactant to be converted into product or products. The time required for half of a given sample to undergo radioactive decay. Half reaction. Either the oxidation part or the reduction part of a redox reaction. Halogens. Group 7A elements: fluorine, chlorine, bromine and iodine. Hard water. Water containing Fe3+, Ca2+, and Mg2+ ions which forms precipitate with soap. Heat. A form of energy that flows between two samples of matter because of their differences in temperature. Heat capacity. The amount of heat required to raise the temperature of a body of any mass 1 degree Celsius. Heat of condensation. The amount of heat that must be removed from 1 gram of a vapor at its condensation point to condense the vapor with no change in temperature. Heat of crystallization. The amount of heat that must be removed from 1 gram of a liquid at its freezing point to freeze it with no change in temperature. Heat of fusion. The amount of heat required to melt 1 gram of solid at its melting point with no change in temperature, usually expressed in joules per gram. The molar heat of fusion is the amount of heat required to melt 1 mole of a solid at its melting point with no change in temperature and is usually expressed in kilojoules per mole. Heat of solution. The amount of heat absorbed in the formation of solution that contains 1 mole of solute. The value is positive if heat is absorbed, that is endothermic, and negative if heat is released, that is exothermic. Heat of vaporization. The amount of heat required to vaporize 1 gram of a liquid at its boiling point with no change in temperature, usually expressed in joules per gram. The molar heat of vaporization is the amount of heat required to vaporize 1 mole of a liquid at its boiling point with no change in temperature and usually expressed in kilojoules per mole. Heavy water. Water containing deuterium, a heavy isotope of hydrogen. Heisenberg uncertainty principle. It is impossible to determine accurately both the momentum and position of an electron simultaneously. Henry's law. The pressure of the gas above a solution is proportional to the concentration of the gas in the solution. Hess's law of heat summation. The enthalpy change for a reaction is the same whether it occurs in one step or a series of steps. Heterocyclic amine. Amine in which the nitrogen is part of a ring. Heterogeneous catalyst. A catalyst that exists in a different phase, that is, solid, liquid or gas, from the reactants. A contact catalyst. Heterogeneous equilibria. Equilibria involving species in more than one phase. Heterogeneous mixture. A mixture that does not have uniform composition and properties throughout. Heteronuclear. Consisting of different elements. High spin complex. Crystal field designation for an outer orbital complex. All T2G and EG orbitals are singly occupied before any pairing occurs. Homologous series. A series of compounds in which each member differs from the next by a specific number and kinds of atoms. Homonuclear. Consisting of only one element. Hund's rule. All orbitals of a given sublevel must be occupied by single electrons before pairing begins. Hybridization. Mixing a set of atomic orbitals to form a new set of atomic orbitals with the same total electron capacity and with properties and energies intermediate between those of the original unhybridized orbitals. Hydrate. A solid compound that contains a definite percentage of bound water. Hydrate isomers. Isomers of crystalline complexes that differ in whether water is present inside or outside the coordination sphere. Hydration. Reaction of a substance with water. Hydration energy. The energy change accompanying the hydration of a mole of gas and ions. Hydride. A binary compound of hydrogen. Hydrocarbons. Compounds that contain only carbon and hydrogen. Hydrogen bond. A fairly strong dipole-dipole interaction but still considerably weaker than the covalent or ionic bonds between molecules containing hydrogen directly bonded to a small, highly electronegative atoms such as nitrogen, oxygen or fluorine. Hydrogenation. The reaction in which hydrogen adds across a double or a triple bond. Hydrolysis. The reaction of a substance with water or its ions. Hydrolysis constant. An equilibrium constant for a hydrolysis reaction. Hydrometer. A device used to measure the densities of liquids and solutions. Inner orbital complex. Valence bond designation for a complex in which the metal ion utilizes d orbitals for one shell inside the outermost occupied shell in its hybridization. Isomers. Different substances that have the same formula. Ionization isomers. Isomers that result from the interchange of ions inside and outside the coordination sphere. Inert S-pair effect. Characteristic of the post-transition minerals. Tendency of the outermost electrons to remain non-ionized or unshared in compounds. Insoluble compound. A very slightly soluble compound. Indicators. For acid-base titrations, organic compounds that exhibit different colors in solutions of different acidities. Used to determine the point at which reaction between two solutes is complete. Ionization constant. Equilibrium constant for the ionization of a weak electrolyte. Ion product for water. Equilibrium constant for the ionization of water Kw is equal to H3O plus OH minus is equal to 1.00 10.14 at 25 degrees centigrade. Inhibitory catalyst. An inhibitor, a catalyst that decreases the rate of reaction. Integrated rate equation. An equation giving the concentration of a reactant remaining after a specified time has different mathematical form for different orders of reactants. Ionization, the breaking up of a compound into separate ions. Ideal solution, a solution that obeys Rolle's law exactly. Insulator, poor electric and heat conductor. Intermolecular forces, forces between individual particles, that is atoms, molecules and ions of a substance. Isomorphous, refers to crystals having the same atomic arrangement. Ideal gas, a hypothetical gas that obeys exactly all postulates of the kinetic molecular theory. Ideal gas law, the product of pressure and the volume of an ideal gas is directly proportional to the number of moles of the gas and the absolute temperature. Ionization, in aqueous solution, the process in which a molecular compound reacts with water and forms ions. Ionic bonding, chemical bonding resulting from the transfer of one or more electrons from one atom or a group of atoms to another. Ionic compounds, compounds containing predominantly ionic bonding. Ionic geometry, the arrangement of atoms, not lone pairs of electrons, about the central atom of a polyatomic ion. Isoelectric, having the same electronic configurations. Ionization energy, the minimum amount of energy required to remove the most loosely held electron of an isolated gaseous atom or ion. Isotopes, two or more forms of atoms of the same element with different masses, atoms containing the same number of protons but different number of neutrons. Ion, an atom or a group of atoms that carries an electric charge.